This is central Alberta.
Well, I think when I listen to people who talk about fishing, it's more...
Colin Malang and his family live on a small farm near Camrose, southeast of Edmonton.
That is the actual fishing.
The Malangs raise organic chicken and pork. Colin is concerned that his farming not only be environmentally sustainable, but also ethical. He grew up on a farm, raising pigs and chickens with his father.
I loved working with the chickens and working with the pigs. And I loved working with my dad. And that went great until I went to agriculture college. And what I learned was the chemicalization of farming. And I learned about, like for instance, a pig wasn't an animal, it was made up of chemical interactions. And I learned how I could manipulate those chemical interactions using other chemicals. And after spending 2 years at agriculture college, I came home and I realized that I couldn't believe how dumb my dad had gotten in 2 years. And I set out to be a modern farmer. I now saw myself as a businessman.
Colin built a large commercial hog operation. However, he became concerned about his dependence on antibiotics.
We fed antibiotic right from when they were babies all the way to market, because I was told it was safe and it was fine. But it was also easy. But it also got to the point where I didn't want to feed our own product to our children.
In our last program, we examined the growth of corporate factory agriculture, an industry that generates severe environmental, social, and cultural problems. But there's a growing backlash against a form of agriculture that many believe is unsustainable. Ecological, organic, and ethical farming is a growing alternative to industrial agriculture and could be a tremendous benefit to the environment, while helping to preserve traditional rural life. This is the industrial mind applied to farming. Factory agriculture has developed a dependence on antibiotics because of the way the animals are raised. Young animals are vaccinated against most common viral diseases. However, when they go to the growing sheds, there is a high risk that a bacterial infection could get into the barn. If it did, it could spread quickly in the crowded conditions. Antibiotics increase growth rates and can prevent bacterial infections. The drugs are routinely added to feeds for healthy animals. 90% of all the antibiotics used in North America are used in agriculture. Professor of Agriculture, Anne Clark.
25 million pounds of antibiotics are used prophylactically in American agriculture. That is to say, on animals that are not sick. That's a lot of antibiotics. And the fact that it's used on animals that aren't actually sick suggests that the conditions that they're being reared under are sufficiently stressful and sufficiently abnormal that these animals require that kind of crutch just to keep them alive until we kill them.
There are nearly 300 million people in the United States and Canada. Processing and marketing most of the food they eat has become a huge monolithic industry controlled by a relatively small number of multinational corporations. The processors own or control many of the factory farms. Industrial farming has developed alongside factory food restaurants. Each year, these restaurant chains buy millions of tons of beef, chicken, and pork. Consumers spend billions of dollars a year on fast food. Much of it is high in fat, calories, and cholesterol. The ascension of industrial food has led some, like Colin Malang, to seek alternatives.
I'll always remember there's one fellow wanted to buy a side of pork, and he said, "Did you feed antibiotic?" And I said, "Yeah." And he walked away from me. And I was stunned. Because, and I will always remember what that felt like, because I felt awful. I thought, here's a guy, because I'd always, I thought, well, I'm doing what the industry says, and here's someone who says, no, I don't want to eat what you're producing.
Colin raises relatively large numbers of animals in a more natural way. After they are started indoors, the chicks are transferred to outdoor pens, where, like free-range chickens, they can eat grass, seeds, and insects. There's a high demand for Colin's product.
The feedback that we get are comments like, it's the best tasting chicken that I've ever eaten, best tasting pork I've ever eaten. My parents' generation will say, that's how meat tasted when I was on the farm growing up. Before, my ego stroke was having big equipment, trying to farm as much land as we could, using lots of chemicals, wanting to get bigger and bigger and bigger was where my ego was wanting to take me. Whereas now, it gets stroked by people saying that what we're doing is a good thing.
Raising the chickens is extremely low tech. It only takes a few minutes a day to move the birds to a fresh patch of grass. Colin listens carefully to what his customers tell him.
I have not come across one person who said to me, yeah, I really like the idea of this bird or this pig or steer being fed antibiotic. I really like the idea that you're feeding, animal byproducts back to a chicken or a pig. I really like the idea that these animals are being raised in tight confinement. So, based on what consumers are telling me, there's a huge demand.
Piggies!
Piggies!
Let's go! Piggies! Let's go, guys!
Marnie Cuff and Paul Eisenbarth call themselves ecological farmers. They raise pigs that thrive on grass.
They're very much an outdoor pig. They're called British large black pigs or Cornish pigs. That's it. Howdy, girls. They're much longer in the legs than you would probably see in a commercial pig, longer in the body. And the heavy ear covering is, protection for digging and rooting.
This ancient breed is nearly extinct because the animals don't fit the demands of factory agriculture.
When you put them indoors on the commercial feed, they tend to be way too fatty. So we like to have them eat just whatever is produced on the farm. And we've never had a single health concern with these animals at all. That is, virtually unheard of in conventional hog buildings these days.
This is a pig factory in North Carolina. North Carolina is pig country, but there are no independent hog farmers in the state. In the past 15 years, the industry has been completely taken over by corporate factory farms. Huge complexes house thousands of pigs. These operations can generate as much liquid sewage as a small city. Liquid hog manure is stored in massive cesspools that are open to the air. The stink from these lagoons is unimaginable. The manure is disposed of by spraying it on the land, but the size of the land base is not nearly large enough to safely absorb the waste. The result has been severe water pollution. The industry denies they are creating a problem. The eastern coastal plain of North Carolina had a rich, diverse ecology. Myriad rivers and creeks drift lazily to the Atlantic. Today, almost all the rivers are severely polluted with hog waste. This is a research farm at the University of Guelph. Anne Clark is a professor of plant production. She's a harsh critic of large-scale agriculture, as well as the agricultural schools and governments that actively promote and foster it.
Government and academia needs to take responsibility for serving the citizens and the environment first, and we are not doing that. One of my big concerns is that many of the interventions, genetic engineering and otherwise, that we are now developing in agricultural research are simply prolonging and exacerbating ecologically dysfunctional production systems. So this is called an arboretum, but it's a lot more than trees. You've got to accommodate a lot of different life forms in order to make a functioning ecosystem.
In some ways, yeah.
Anne is a proponent of an alternative form of agriculture, farming based on working with nature. Her classes are extremely popular with students. She and instructor Henry Koch are teaching a class about natural plant succession, the natural progression of plant species that will turn bare soil into a forest. Anne believes such knowledge is vital for a sustainable agriculture.
The only model that we have of true sustainability is nature. We don't know enough to say this is sustainable or that's sustainable. The way that I like to think about designing farming systems is what does nature do and how can we emulate that?
Nature-based farming is not new. When the first settlers fled the poverty of Europe to farm in North America, they brought animals with them. Early agriculture was subsistence farming. The people first produced enough to feed themselves. Any excess was sold to buy what they could not take from the land. The animals were an important part of these mixed farms, and they were treated with care and dignity. Farming was considered a noble occupation. Pioneer farmers established a rich rural culture. The first fall fairs were in part a celebration of Thanksgiving. People gathered together to proudly display the diversity of plants and animals that were raised on farms. Almost all farms were small mixed farms.
Historically, we would have had mixed farms with some livestock, some crops, some apple orchard, whatever it might be, all together on the same farm, and everybody would have had them. So there'd be a lot of diversity across the landscape.
Farming used simple mechanical technology and horsepower. Farmers were among the wealthiest people in society.
The wealth that was in the countryside 50 to 100 years ago, that was all from farming with horses. Granted, people lived more simply then. Their demands of life were less. They didn't expect to necessarily go to university. They didn't expect to travel to Tahiti every summer, or Florida or wherever it is. But they did well in those days. And it was the move towards tractors, towards mechanization, that really spelled the end of wealth on the farm.
Modern agriculture has developed a dependence on extremely expensive technology. Costly inputs like machinery, fuel, and chemicals mean that most farmers have to cultivate massive areas of land. Most of the cultivated land is used to grow grain. As much as 90% of the grain grown in North America is used not to feed people, but to feed livestock. Cultivating vast areas of land to grow grain creates several problems. Successive crops quickly deplete the soil nutrients. Most grain farmers replace these with chemical fertilizers. Breaking up large areas of soil also creates a situation that is rare in nature.
You never see bare soil in nature, because as soon as there is bare soil from a hurricane or a landslide or whatever, a forest fire, nature has evolved all sorts of methods for quickly recovering that soil. But what is modern agriculture, especially for livestock feed, based on? Bare soil.
When the seeds are planted, the crops quickly begin to grow. But the grains are not alone. There are many species of wild plants specifically adapted to colonize bare soil. These vigorous plants compete with the grains for moisture and nutrients. The most common solution used by farmers is chemical herbicides. Producing chemicals to kill plants is a massive multinational industry.
Monsanto would be out of business in a year if Roundup actually addressed the cause of weeds on farms. It doesn't affect the cause, the ecologically dysfunctional farming practices that encourage the proliferation of weeds. Rather, it addresses the symptom. The weed is the symptom of the dysfunctional farming. So you kill the weed, but you for sure don't want to kill the cause, because then you wouldn't have a demand for your product in the next year.
Anne is a proponent of grass-based agriculture rather than farming based on grain.
Grass agriculture or grass farming would be where you're relying on typically perennial forages for a major part or the entire diet in your livestock.
The prehistoric ancestors of many farm animals evolved as foragers, living on native grasses and other plants. One benefit of grass agriculture is that the animals do much of the work. They harvest the crop and spread their own manure.
You're not opening up the soil to erosion, you're keeping it covered. Nutrient cycling is far more healthy because most of the nutrients that are there are just cycling through the manure and urine on site. Health problems are far reduced, the animals are happier and healthier outside.
Go, bud. He's after Teresa. She must be in heat.
Yeah.
So just keep an eye on that.
Okay.
Sure looks like she's in heat.
Almost all of Paul and Marnie's farm is sown with grass. They rotate their pigs and cattle through small paddocks to maximize the grass's ability to regrow. The pigs are also excellent for weed control because they'll eat almost anything that is green.
The essence of organic agriculture is problem avoidance by design, as against conventional farming, which has evolved to being problem solving after the fact. Solving problems that are created by ecologically dysfunctional farming practices.
Paul and Marnie raise endangered species of cattle along with their pigs. The black and white Canadian lineback and the dark sorrel-colored red poll are extremely rare. These animals are smaller than most popular commercial breeds. They also have a much gentler temperament.
There's so many benefits to it. The whole lifestyle benefit of, you know, having these animals that are easy to care for with low inputs, that are easy to be around. You know, the amount of pleasure I get out of being around the different breeds that were the animals of the landscape. But we didn't have all of these extra tools to confine animals. Chaos in there.
In the past, these hardy animals served several purposes. They provided both milk and meat. They were also used as oxen. Their diet is composed almost entirely of grass.
They finish nicely on pasture only. We don't give them grain except as an occasional treat. The rest of the time it's hay and pasture, and we finish them at about 30 months of age, which is a kind of a typical European age to slaughter a steer.
Here he is.
Marnie and Paul sell many of their animals to other ecological and organic farmers. They believe there is great value in the genes that are disappearing because of factory farming.
I really believe not only pragmatically do these breeds make sense, but also ideologically. People that are looking at taking a different kind of responsibility. It's not just the soil and the seeds that you have to worry about maintaining. I mean, we should be taking responsibility in maintaining some of these livestock genes as well.
These animals are also part of the growth of alternatives to corporate agriculture. They are bred to thrive under natural conditions, the antithesis of factory farming. Cattle breeder Don Shaver Jr. has spent 30 years developing these animals.
We've analyzed where agriculture is heading. We're very concerned that large corporations are involved in agriculture. We're not convinced that decisions that are being made on a global basis are for the health or well-being of the planet. They're for the health and well-being of the shareholders.
Don's cattle are a composite of 11 different breeds, some of them rare. His goal is to develop a hearty, thrifty animal that can efficiently convert grass into valuable protein.
Every breed probably has a list of plus attributes that obviously you're very interested in, but also they have some negatives. And it was our hope that through combining these breeds and through hard selection, we'd be able to enhance the traits from each breed that we thought was valuable and call out the traits that we knew were not so valuable. It's sort of like being a bean counter. It's a lot of work, many, many hours of weighing cattle, following fertility trends, if fertility is something you're selecting for, and being ruthless. When an animal doesn't meet your criteria, it has to go to slaughter. I'd look at the comparison between the cow and the calf and how big the calf is in relation to the mother. She's got a heck of a calf on her.
Grass-based agriculture means that the soil is always protected by plants. Healthy grasses and legumes can compete with weeds. Cycling natural nutrients through the animals on site also makes economic sense.
All this field is seen as cattle manure. It has not been fertilized for 20 years. Some of our fields here on the farm are 50 years old and haven't been plowed, so I'm not constantly working the land and breaking land up. If you go through a tough economic time and agriculture is cyclical, you don't have these high input costs year after year.
Don's youngest son, Andrew, has decided to stay home and work with his father rather than go to agricultural school. This bull weighs nearly 1,000 kilograms, but he's docile and friendly. People who take a more natural approach to farming often view their animals as partners rather than machines.
I'm very close to our cattle. It's amazing. I've got personal relationships with individual animals. Take a walk. I can tell by the look in a cow's eye what she's going to do and things like that. And you don't get that in a classroom. You need to be out in the field and need to be spending time with the animals to really understand them.
Don sells his cattle around the world, many of them outside North America.
We have to recognize that if our cattle can't function almost as well as a buffalo or deer in the wild, then we might as well still have buffalo and deer. It frustrates me to see people trying to take a wonderful animal with a tremendous ability to convert grasses and roughages into edible protein. And the first thing they do is put them in a sterile environment and a dry feedlot or a cement yard and put feeds into them that aren't natural to them.
Don believes there is a difference between people who work with animals in a natural way and those who are only interested in quick profits.
You either are a cattleman or you own cattle. And I don't do business with guys that just own cattle. I don't like them.
These are the eastern slopes of the Rocky Mountains, a land where the prairie abruptly folds into a towering alpine landscape. It's a land rich in wildlife adapted to grasslands and the rugged hills. It's one of the few places in North America where large wild species can follow the natural courses of their lives. The land has survived in a relatively natural state because it has traditionally been used for ranching. The cattle ranches along the eastern slopes maintain a corridor of habitat that is largely unaltered. Keith Evert is a rancher in southwestern Alberta. Ranching is much different from farming.
I feel ranchers are trying to live within the systems, as where farmers are trying to change it. Farmers plow it up and add all these new species that will bring profits. But out here in the ranch, we're just saying, how can we manage our cattle without doing anything to disrupt the environment we live in? We're trying to work with the system that's already there. So we're taking the native regime or what's already there, the environment that's there, and say, how can we be compatible with that?
Still Ridge Ranch is in the first wave of foothills west of the prairies. The Everts started the ranch 20 years ago from a bare tract of land. By establishing a first-generation ranch, Keith, his wife Bev, and their family have done what most others would have considered impossible.
It's going to get hot. Yeah. One of the philosophies that Bev and myself and our children had was to try and come into agriculture in the 80s and actually be sustainable. We knew it was going to be hard work, and people kept saying to us, you can't do it, you can't do it, and I think that's what made us do it, want to do it more.
They have made their share of mistakes along the way, but try to learn from each misstep.
Instead of having awards on something you do so well, I just wish they had awards on how you really screwed up with things. We could all just go up and say, oh man, you should have seen how I screwed up on this one when I didn't move the cattle at the right time. But it does take time. You have to be out there and paying attention what your land's doing, move your cattle at the right time. But if you don't have the time and you're not willing to do that, you know, maybe you shouldn't be doing it.
The Everts have been able to establish themselves in part because they raise organic beef. They see their efforts as a personal commitment to preserving the natural environment. There is some consumer resistance to organic food because it can cost more to produce.
Most people either belong to some kind of organization that's helping to support the environment, right? And they'll send a check to support that. But when they go to the grocery store, they'll go, "What? That organic stuff is worth $2.50 and I can get this for $2.20?" And I just go, geez, I just don't get it. Why can't they switch that mindset to understand that by doing this, they're actually supporting something that's managed in a regime that will be long-term sustainable?
The first ranches were established by mimicking the way the buffalo used the land. Buffalo, like cattle, are ruminants that can survive on coarse forages because of their specialized digestive system. Before Europeans arrived, huge herds of buffalo migrated across the prairies, feeding on the nutritious native grasses. Part of their migration brought them to the foothills where the native grasses maintained their nutrition even though the plants were dormant. A large portion of the land the efforts use remains in native vegetation. Using indigenous plants and not altering the landscape means their ranching can coexist with the natural world. They have to move their cattle frequently to ensure that native plants are not damaged.
It's a passion and a belief in what you're doing is bettering the land. So when I leave, I hope the land looks better than when I got it. When I see wolves or bears or whatever, or elk or any of the wildlife on our place, I'm almost honored because I go, hey, I'm doing an okay job. They're here for a reason.
A growing number of consumers are seeking alternative foods. Many believe that by buying factory food, they are supporting a socially and environmentally destructive form of agriculture. The Big Carrot is a supermarket stocked entirely with organic food products. The store also does not sell any genetically modified foods. The organic food movement has grown to a point where people can buy virtually any food product without artificial chemicals, hormones, and antibiotics. The organic food movement began with fruits and vegetables because people were concerned about pesticides. The Big Carrot's nutritionist is Julie Daniluk.
The organic produce is often coming from small farmers who are really very interested in the quality of the soil and regenerating their farm and making sure that there's actually higher nutrient content in the food that they're providing.
Organic meat is more complicated to produce. Not only do the animals have to be raised without artificial chemicals, hormones, and antibiotics, but all of the animal feeds have to be raised organically as well.
And the humane factor really hits home with a lot of people. They want to make sure that these animals are being treated well, and organic meat does. The farmers that are involved in that definitely have more humane practices.
Several organizations, like the Organic Crop Improvement Association, certify organic farmers. Organic food is more expensive, but a growing number of people are willing to pay the added cost.
I really love the huge diversity of people who shop here. We have a lot of families, a lot of mothers that are placing importance on what their children are eating. We're having a lot of people with environmental sensitivities, people who have to be very careful about what they're eating. A lot more kind of young and eco-aware people are starting to shop here, which is great.
There is enough demand for organic food that most large corporate supermarkets are beginning to carry many organic products.
It is consumer driven. You make a much bigger protest with your pocketbook than you ever do with your words or your letter writing or your yelling with placards. You know, what you buy drives everything. This
is a Saturday morning farmer's market. It's a place where consumers meet face to face with the people who grow their food. This is the way most food used to be sold. Local farmers selling directly to people in their own community. Alternative farming has attracted the attention of the corporate world because alternative farmers can often make more money. Most mainstream farmers grow their food, send it off to market, and accept whatever the market will pay. Ecological farmers often sell directly to consumers or contract directly with the retailers. Many alternative farmers, like Marnie Cuff, depend on the quality of their products to attract new customers.
Oh, easy, easy. The biggest way we've been marketing our livestock is mostly by word of mouth. We haven't really had to market it, and anyone who's eaten at a customer's place tends to become a customer.
Rancher Keith Evert spends a lot of time working to market his product. His family and 6 other ranch families formed a cooperative to sell fresh organic beef. They got together after a group of local agricultural students did a feasibility study.
We didn't know at that point whether it was going to be natural beef, green beef, organic beef, or whatever. We had no idea. It was really dynamic to get all these people together because we had 7 families. And it was so neat because there was ideas flowing out here and there. And it was probably, I'd say, over a year before we decided to market our first beef, because we really wanted to figure out and be ready for what we were going to do. Now we're at the situation where we market everything we grow on the ranches.
The cooperative first focused on the fresh organic beef market in the urban areas of British Columbia. They are constantly looking for new markets. They travel extensively to meet their customers and sell them on the value of organic food.
Why is organic so expensive? People will say that to me, and I go, is it or isn't it? We really have to figure out that balance. How much does it really cost to have huge factory farms, environmental problems that they create, and they don't pay for it, as average taxpayers do. If somebody's doing a good job, we need to step to the plate as consumers and say, hey, I'll support that. I believe in that concept.
The ranchers realized the integrity of what they were doing was vital to their success. They approached the International Organic Crop Improvement Association to examine and certify their operations as completely organic. At first, some of the ranchers balked at the strict regulations.
We went that extra step with all the certification to be organic, and we have that traceability right from the pasture to the plate. So when we say we're organic, we're not spraying, we're not putting hormones in, we're not fertilizing with artificial inputs, we're not doing all those things. And we get a third-party inspector. We call it the organic police. Okay, it's a pain in the butt, but we need it because that integrity of the organics has to be there. And the group believes in it now.
Ranching is at the center of a unique rural culture closely associated with the natural landscape. This is a provincial lease. Historically, the right to use these large tracts of government-owned land was granted to old ranch families to graze cattle in the summer. The leases rarely change hands. Ranch families have traditionally gathered in the fall to round up their cattle. In ranching country, roundup is an important social event.
Someone's got to go up on the lookout. Got to take quite a crew up there because there's a lot of country.
Give these guys directions, Lou. Yeah, put them in the right area so we know.
So, I mean north. North. You mean that way or that way? That way. Okay.
Roundup is an undertaking where a way to make a living becomes a way of life.
We were lucky enough to be in the lease, which is about 18,000 acres along the British Columbia border there, and it comes into Alberta along the eastern slopes. And that came with a piece of land that we rent. We were able to get the option to be able to use that lease up in there. And that's kind of a unique spot because we get the opportunity to deal with a lot of the older ranch families and the generational ranch families since we're first generation. We get that opportunity to interact with those guys, and it's kind of fun that they have somebody that they can pick on as the new rookies in the neighborhood, so we think it's great. I feel honored to be able to be part of this ranch community. We felt our real roots were the ranch people. Like I felt part of this land and part of this culture. And the ranch community has been great about inviting us in to be part of that. They question sometimes what we do, but they definitely invite us in.
People who depend on nature develop a concern for protecting the environment that supports them.
Are we just raising cattle up here, or are we managing whole systems? Am I just raising cattle for me, or am I managing whole systems for everybody?
For Keith, his ranch and the 6 others in his organic beef co-op are part of a growing movement in sustainable agriculture.
Well, I used to hear all the time, oh, that's for the little market garden. But among us, we must be close to 36,000 acres. You know, it's not like we're a little market garden. We're taking it to that further thing and say, no, this is what we believe in. You know, some of the ranch's grandfather were organic. They just didn't know it because that word wasn't out there. You know, it's amazing.
By returning to old ways and searching for new practical and sustainable methods, alternative agriculture is serving a growing demand.
The whole organic industry is bootstraps up in a hostile environment. They did it themselves. They've developed their own production methods, their own breeds, their own processing facilities. They did it all themselves. And they're doing well at it. So I think there's a lesson in that. They're doing something that society wants.
To purchase a transcript of tonight's episode of The Nature of Things, email us at tnot@toronto.cbc.ca.